And joining us now to talk about reshaping our cities, Enrique Penalosa. He is the former mayor of Bogota, and we welcome you to the province of Ontario and our studios here at TVO.
Thank you very much, Steve.
It's good to meet you. We should first of all say, for those who don't know, Bogota is the capital of Colombia. It is a population of 7 million people. This is a big city that you were in charge of from 1998 to 2001. I want you, just for starters, to describe what life in your city was like as you took over as the mayor at the beginning of the century.
Well, I would say the people were very hopeless relative to all the problems that the city was having. Traffic jams were getting worse. There was a lot of crime, although it had started to come down. And there were almost no parks. Pedestrian spaces were completely taken over by cars. I would say there was very little respect for human dignity, and also a huge percentage of the city, as in most developing country cities, had sprung out illegally in what we would call slums, or in very poor neighborhoods where in many cases did not even have sewage, sometimes even not even running water.
So your top priorities when you took over were to do what?
Our priority was really to make a city more for people, because actually it sounds very simple, but in fact in the 20th century, everywhere in the world, cities were made much more for cars than for people. And in a rich city, you may have enough money to do for cars and also enough money to do parks and schools and sidewalks. But in poor cities, it very often happened that all investments went to cars, and then there was not enough money to make great schools or libraries or parks or sidewalks. So
one of the things you wanted to do was improve public transit.
Clearly, transport is a very special problem in developing countries and almost everywhere, because most problems we have in a developing country city tend to get solved as society becomes richer. I mean, if we become richer, we have better hospitals, better housing, better schools, but transport will get much worse because more people will have cars. So it's, I would say, it's clearly a non-sustainable model, because as we progress, the problem gets worse. And not only worse for the people in the city, huge traffic jams, pollution, and of course this also is a very bad problem for global warming. In Asian cities, for example, at this time, population is growing by 45 million every year, urban population in Asian cities. And so if the developing world doesn't find a more sustainable way to move about, we have a huge environmental problem for the world.
Sure. So what did you do on public transit? What kinds of things?
Well, the first thing that we had clear is that we were not going to solve mobility making more roads for cars, because clearly no city in the world has solved mobility making more space for cars, because what creates traffic is not the number of cars, but the number of trips and the length of those trips. So if you make bigger roads, people make more trips and they go farther. Mm-hmm. So we started to restrict car use through tag numbers. We were able to put 40% of cars out of the street during peak hours in the morning and peak hours in the afternoon. Each car had a 2-day restriction. We had a war to get cars off the sidewalks where they used to park forever, to restrict parking, but mostly showing respect for human dignity. My hair was black before this battle.
People parked on the sidewalk?
It was the normal thing for decades, and it was a war to make a more democratic city, which would show that a citizen who walked was as important as one who had a car. These issues in developing countries is not just in terms of mobility, but also in terms of equity. Bicycles, for example, we began to make I would say in America, including Canada or the United States, there were very little bicycle ways, almost nothing in the year 1999. And we invested a huge amount of money, not just on sidewalks, but also protected bicycle ways. And we went almost from 0 bicyclists to more than 350,000 every day going to work, which also saves about 20% of their income if they can save on on buses, but also it's a very powerful symbol of equity, which shows that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car.
But when you talk public transit, you're talking buses, subways, or streetcars. What did you opt for?
Okay, yes. Clearly you need mass transit, but train and rail is very expensive. It's extremely expensive to use rail, and so we created a system that was copied from a small Brazilian city in Curitiba, and I think today is the best bus system in the world. It's a system that works with buses, but it's really like a rail system. People pay when they enter a station. When a bus, an articulated bus, 2 or 3 bodied bus arrives, the doors open simultaneously, the bus doors and the station doors, so you can get 80 people out of the bus and 80 people into the bus in seconds, and then the bus goes on. It's exactly like a subway system, but with buses, with exclusive lanes for buses. Mm-hmm. So we are moving more passengers per hour direction than 95% of the world subways at this time, at a fraction of the cost. And we also did, of course, we have to do a lot of marketing, because it's the same thing in Canada. I mean, buses have a bad image. People think it's for the poor. It's not sexy, so people want to invest in trams. I mean, trams are very cute, but actually buses have much more capacity, they can be faster, and they are much cheaper. So, and if you do a really high quality system like this, you can achieve much better results. But, for example, we gave it a name. We called it the Transmillennium, for example, a little bit of marketing efforts.
So now, after all of these efforts are in place, how would you compare Bogota today with the way it was 8 years ago when you first came in as mayor?
Well, Bogota still has huge problems, but people's attitude, citizens' attitude completely changed from one of hopelessness into one of confidence in the possibility of creating a better future. And one clearly, what is clear now, that what makes a city better is to make better spaces for people, to make I mean, the thing that really makes a quality city is pedestrian public spaces, sidewalks, plazas, parks. And of course, there is sometimes a conflict. How do you distribute road space? Says a lot about democracy. How do you distribute road space between pedestrians, bicycles, public transport, and cars?
Let me follow up on cars, because you did something, I think, in the year 2000 that must have been extremely difficult to do. You brought in car-free days in Bogota. How did you do that?
This is, I mean, we just had some time ago the World Car Free Day, the 22nd of September. Mm-hmm. But we did something that is really a car-free day. In this 7 million inhabitant city, we had one day, 0 cars, only taxis, and of course, working vehicles, because we did not want the city to come to a stop. I mean, vehicles which were trucks above 2 tons or things like this. And then it was a tremendous success. So much that we held a referendum to ask for people to vote whether they wanted to have a car-free day the first Thursday of every February, every year. And it was approved. And now we have this car-free day, which is a very learning experience. And it's also a social integration experience, because the rich and the poor have to go by public transport together as equals, which is not something usual in developing country cities. And actually, 90% of the people have shorter travel times than during regular days, because there is much less traffic jams, there is less pollution.
But was this a voluntary thing?
No,
it's
mandatory. Law. It's mandatory, and if somebody brings the car out, it has a huge fine. By the way, if somebody brings the car out, it's as if you were running out naked in the street, because, I mean, you know, because there are no cars, so if there is one out, so it's very...
People be embarrassed to do it.
Yes.
Okay, I understand. Is that formula transferable to other cities?
Well, our city is very compact. Developing country cities, the most important thing to have quality transport is to have density. Because, for example, if Bogota had Toronto's density, we would be almost 8 times bigger with the same population. So distances would be much longer, and you would not be able to have as high a frequency. I mean, you could not go with a bus every 2 minutes or every 3 minutes, because they would go empty. Mm-hmm. So each city has to find its own solution. In our city, most of the people use public transport, not because we are very sophisticated, but because they are too poor to have cars. Only about 30% of homes have cars. But what is successful is that more than 20% of our bus system users are car owners who live at home. Why do they take public transport? For the same reason that people take public transport everywhere, not because they love it or because they love the environment, but because it's faster. But in short, I mean, I think ideally, in the future, most people in a city should not use the car to go to work. Cars are wonderful, but they should be maybe to go at night or to go to the lake or for vacation.
Well, I saw your video, and one of the lines you say is that, you know, you can create a city that is good for cars, or you can create a city that is friendly for people, but you can't do both. Why can't you do both?
There is a contradiction. Clearly, there is a conflict, I mean, between a city that is very friendly to cars, because a city that is very friendly to cars has very wide roads, high-velocity roads, and if you are near these high-velocity roads, it's very unpleasant, especially if you are with a 3-year-old child. I mean, if you tell any 3-year-old child in the world today, watch out, a car, the child will jump in fright, and with good reason, because there are more than 250,000 children who are killed by cars every year in the world. That means more than 1 million children. And this does not include the children killed inside cars. This is children out. So a very wide road, very high velocity, is not pleasant to be around. If you have a smaller road, bigger sidewalks, slower, is more pleasant. And if you have a pedestrian-only street, it's even more pleasant without the noise. So, I mean,
let me ask you about that, though, because you spend half your time in New York City now.
Yes.
And I heard you say, you teach at NYU, and I heard you say they should take Broadway and turn it into a pedestrian thoroughfare. Could you really do that?
Well, let me tell you, I talked about this about 8 years ago, and now they did it. Broadway now is pedestrian. Broadway is being
cars
closed.
on Broadway?
No. Broadway is being closed now around from Old Times Square. I mean, they have already like 10 blocks completely closed. And from Central Park all the way down to 14th Street, Union Square, they practically took half the street out to make bicycle and pedestrian space. And for about 10 blocks, it's completely pedestrian. They took all cars out in Manhattan. So actually, I am very happy that this, and ideally, this should continue farther downtown and farther uptown. But in Manhattan in general, it's a very pedestrian city. Very few cars, very few people have cars.
Oh, New York is a great city to walk in, for sure, and take the subway.
And of course, it could be much better because you could get rid of parking in this curbside parking and make bigger sidewalks and make protected bicycle ways.
I want to ask you one more thing, because we've got 2 minutes left here, and everything's political at the end of the day, and here's the question I want to ask you. You brought in these far-reaching changes. You tell us Bogota is a much nicer place to live nowadays. There is more equity between cars and people. You ran for re-election and lost. Where's the lesson there?
Well, when I finished my term, I had the highest positive image any mayor has ever had in the history of the city of Bogota.
So how did you lose?
Because I did not run immediately. I went to New York for several years, and I was about like for 7 years. And then, the political enemies begin to make stories. But actually, I can assure you that to make a city more friendly to people is always successful politically. It's a good investment politically. It's difficult at first, but in the end, people will love it. And in our case, they did love it. I lost for other reasons, but much later. And of course, I had to go into many conflicts to try to get public good to prevail over private interest. And this has a cost sometimes, but again, I would say that for politicians who are interested in doing these changes, always to change is difficult, and always to take space away from cars to give it to bicycles or to people is difficult, but I can assure them that they will be successful even politically in the end.
Okay, we'll write that out and we'll let them know about that. Senor Penalosa, thank you so much. Buenas noches.
Thank you very much, Steve.